Hey folks, Alan Manick, the Hot Rod Hippie here. Today we're talking about this sheet metal nibbler you've seen all over Facebook in viral videos. So this is a really affordable sheet metal nibbler that's been all over the internet lately in videos of somebody using it and cutting away, cutting circles, slicing through sheet metal like a hot knife through butter. And I was really suspect about that. So I thought, why don't I pick one up, why don't I see how it works, and I'll figure it out for myself. I'm gonna let you know what the specifications of it are, how it's constructed, and show you it in actual operation to let you know what I really think about it. So first and foremost, what is this thing? Well, it's a sheet metal nibbler. Basically, a cutter head slices through sheet metal through a die and basically punches out little half moons, little crescent moons out of sheet metal or plate steel even on the bigger machines, and nibbles its way through the metal. Bite by bite, it cuts its way through. They can be really handy and really neat tools because as you go, you can change directions, you can change what you're doing in pretty neat ways. These handheld style ones have a little built-in one-piece design die setup, so they aren't quite as versatile as the big industrial machines. Now, the big industrial machines, by that I mean machines like the Pullmax. A lot of metal workers, a lot of metal shapers are really familiar with the Pullmax machines. You can really nibble some sheet metal with those things, and I'll demonstrate using one of those as well in this video. So when you pick one of these up, what you get is you get the cutter. It's a double-ended design. It's got dies on both sides, and it comes with a side handle so you can control it. That threads onto the outside of the dies as they're externally threaded for the handle. You obviously have the unit itself. It comes with a spare cutter shaft and a spare die, as well as a wrench to go ahead and change out the internals on this thing to switch to that different cutter, that different die as you need. It has these set screws on here, and you can actually loosen those up and you can angle it, so if you want to cut in a different direction, you can go ahead and do that. So like I said, nobody's really putting their name on this thing. It's made in China, and that's about all I really know of it. It came with a little card from the president of the company that makes it about their quality tools that they produce, but there was no website, there was no name of the actual company listed. There was like 5 or 6 different logos on there, which I didn't understand. Some of them were in Chinese, some of them were just letters in English, so I didn't really dig any deeper because, well, quite simply, it's obvious that it's just a company trying to produce this so anybody could sell it. I could sell this as the HotRodHippie sheet metal nibbler. I'm always really skeptical about products where somebody doesn't even bother to put their own name on it. So now with this tool, you take your drill, you stick it onto the shaft of the thing, you tighten it down, and you go ahead and spin it. As you spin it, the shaft actually moves up and down and will create the cutting action. So you can see as that cutter is going up and down, it's slicing through the metal, it's actually cutting with the cutter head against that die and knocking out little bits of metal. It shoots those little crescent moon nibbles out of the ejection port on the cutter die, and overall, it does what it's supposed to do. It's the straightforward design. Nibblers have been around for decades. They've been around for a very long time. Now, the tool's rated at 1.8mm steel and 2mm on softer materials like copper and aluminum. 1.8mm, what's that mean? That's about 70 thousandths or 0.070 inch. So that's actually a pretty decent amount of material. 16 gauge is somewhere around 0.65. I was pretty skeptical about that. In the video for this thing, you'll see a guy using it on like 22 gauge, using it on material like this metal roofing that I have in my backdrop here. So I was pretty skeptical that this thing was going to be able to actually do the heavier materials. Around the shop, I put it to use and I used it on some 16 gauge. I roughed out a piece that I was making. I was like, well, might as well give this a try. See if I can rough out the shape and I'll cut it in with shears by hand afterward. And I have to admit, it was honestly doing a pretty darn good job of it. I cut that thing out, I probably had, I think, about at least 48 inches worth of cutting on that material, and it cut through it. It really didn't give me any hiccups. It didn't fight. I lubricated it as I was going for nice solid operation because I wanted to give it a fair chance. I was actually able to control it okay. I didn't cut right on my line because I wanted to clean it up afterward for a better finish. On the heavier material, I did find that it wasn't cutting quite as tight as circles as it's indicated it could on the lighter materials. Maybe that's operator error, but I think it just doesn't do the thicker stuff quite as well, cutting tight radiuses. So let's go ahead and check out what's inside of this thing. So the outer body construction is aluminum. It has a twin bearing design to support the shaft, one on the inside and one on the outside that you can see in the picture. The shaft is an eccentric design. It's a steel shaft with a hex drive on the end that you put your drill on, and then it has an offset bearing at the end that moves the guide block back and forth. What I'm calling the guide block is a steel block with a set screw in it that just holds the cutter shaft in place. There's a circlip that holds all that into the body, and then this plastic cap on the end that retains the grease into the unit so you can access things to change out the cutter blade. Now, as you see it operating here, you see how the eccentric moves that back and forth, and the cutter moves with it. It's a very simple mechanism, but it is effective to do the job. So now you've seen this thing inside, let's go ahead and run it. Let's demonstrate this thing in operation as it works. I'm gonna cut some 16 gauge steel with it, some 18 gauge steel, which has a nice heavy radius on it, so you can see how it gets around the radius, and also some real thin aluminum that I got floating around here. Well, now you've seen that thing cut, you've seen it work around that 16 gauge, around that 18 gauge, and that thin aluminum. Let me tell you what I really thought of it and how it functioned on those materials. The 16 gauge, as you can see, like I said before, it cut through it pretty darn well. So then I moved over to the 18 gauge. Now on the 18 gauge, I had a nice heavy radius on that piece. It was about a 1-inch radius, I think. And that was a piece that I bent on the brake just to show you in a previous video about bead roller dies, the radiuses you can create with different tools. So I'm gonna see, well, how would this thing get around that radius? You know, cutting in a straight line on a flat piece, that's one thing, but how about a shapely piece, something with a little bit of form to it? Well, I'm happy to report that it actually cut around there without any issue. I didn't have any problems floating around that radius. So I was actually pretty impressed with cutting on that as well. Now, lastly, I cut that thin gauge sheet metal because I wanted to see if I could get those tight radiuses you see the guy cutting in the videos of this tool. And that's where things changed a little bit here. What happened there is I started cutting and I cut those really nice tight radiuses and I was starting to get pretty impressed. And as I was cutting across that piece, all of a sudden the tool stopped moving. I couldn't advance anymore. It was still going, it was still spinning, and it seemed like it should be cutting, but it wasn't. So what was going on? I tore it down a little bit, I stopped, I looked at it, and I tried to figure out what's going on because I thought I broke the thing. It was red hot, it burned my hand a little bit when I touched it, and it was kind of notchy and tight. So I broke it down, I checked out what was going on. I thought maybe the internals broke. The internals appeared to be fine. So what was going on here? Well, what happened was that the die actually clogged up. The thin aluminum was so thin and the clearances were so large in the tool itself that that soft aluminum gummed up the works. It got stuck in the cutter and the die and just didn't allow it to function anymore. It was all clogged up. You can see that compared from the standard proper cutter, clear and open, versus the now clogged up one, it didn't stand a chance. It wasn't gonna work anymore. So in a way, I kind of broke it a little bit. I am now on to the backup cutter and backup die that came with this tool. So now I'm down some of those spare parts that it came with. So what does that mean? Well, that's something that concerns me a little bit here. It's neat that it comes with a spare setup, but now I don't have a spare setup. I only have the backups. They're in there now. So once those break, I'm done. I'm out of it. I can't use the tool anymore. So I'm gonna have to buy a whole nother one if I wanna continue using it at that point. Clearly to me, the clearances on this thing are just too large. When I was cutting on 16 gauge, I was getting burrs on there a little bit. Nothing crazy at all. For it to be burring on 16 gauge, when I'm cutting on the Pullmax on 3/16 plate, I don't get burrs. That's a little concerning. That means to me that the clearance to the cutter, to the die, is just a little too large. I don't have wire gauge checkers on hand like a machinist would to check what the clearance is on the die versus the cutter. but I'm just guessing that it's a little bit large for the material because they're just trying to cover a broad range of things. But because of that, that really thin material that I was nibbling away with on that aluminum, well, it got stuck in that clearance. It gummed up the works and it made that die fail. I wasn't able to knock the cutter out of the die and continue working with that setup. I had to switch to the backup one. Another note here is when I was using it around the shop the other day, I was cutting a lot of long sections, something like 48 plus inches of cut I was doing with this thing. The unit got pretty darn warm. It's an aluminum body, and as I was holding it with my hand, the part of my palm that was actually touching the side of it was getting pretty hot even through a pair of gloves. In the end, what do I really think about this thing? Well, for less than $40, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you're somebody cutting on some lighter materials once in a while, this might be actually a really handy thing. I was impressed with its operation even on 16 gauge steel. It was smooth, it was pretty easy to operate. After a few minutes of operation, I was able to cut a straight line pretty well. This might work out pretty well for you as a homeowner, a do-it-yourselfer, somebody just messing around a little bit. So as a professional using it, well, that's where the problem comes in. I would not see using this on a regular basis continually. I was pretty impressed with it and I thought maybe it was gonna be a tool I'd go to all the time, but since I'm 2 days into using this thing and I'm already on the backup cutter and the backup die, that's a problem. That's not gonna work out for me. So if I want a nibbler, I'm gonna go to one of those like a Makita cordless, one of the higher end ones, or I'll use the Pullmax. So now that I mentioned the Pullmax, let's show the Pullmax in operation so you can see an industrial unit versus this hand unit in operation. This week I had an airbox I was making for a LS3 powered Corvette, and I needed to make an aluminum flange. So I took some 3/16 plate aluminum 6061 to the Pullmax and I cut out the flange that I needed. I didn't have any guides, anything like that. I just powered right through that. And it gave me no trouble whatsoever, powering right through 3/16 aluminum. It was actually the first time I ever used the Pullmax as a nibbler. I've always used it for other operations, forming, shrinking, things like that. So that's this product, folks. Overall, like I said, do-it-yourselfer, a hobbyist, you might find this a pretty useful little setup for less than 40 bucks. Take a drill you already have and get to work with it. I'll put a link in the description down below to Amazon where you can pick one of these up for yourself. Like I said, I think I paid like $37 with free shipping for this thing. So it is a pretty affordable tool and it can be pretty handy for just quick, dirty operations. All right, folks, thanks for checking this video out. Thanks for coming around. If you like this video, drop it a like. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you have one of these? Has it broken on you? Have you been using it without any issue so far? Or do you have an industrial one you like better? Something else I should maybe check out. Subscribe to this channel for more content like this in the near future. Thanks for coming around, folks. Have a good one.